Just for a few minutes, continuing with our discussion of the difference between general and particular Baptist, I'll talk with you about a few basic considerations. First of all, the difference between the general Baptist and the particular Baptist is a disagreement concerning the atonement. That's how the issue and the contention between the two is laid out, atonement. In other words, general Baptist was a party who believed God made atonement for all humans. So they would talk about unconditional or unlimited atonement. The particular Baptist, on the other hand, was a party who believed God died only for the elect, and they would be called, or we would name them or give them a position of limited atonement. So the general Baptist would be Arminian, and they would hold to unlimited atonement. The particular Baptist would be a group that would hold to what's called limited atonement. It's important to realize that the disagreement between the particular and general Baptist is a disagreement which is based on philosophical ideas and not on biblical truth concerning the atonement. Now, I think this is where everybody gets a little mixed up a little bit. We get so wound up and heated over this issue of the difference between the belief in atonement, when in reality, general Baptists and particular Baptists, even Calvinists and Arminians, have a lot of similarities in their beliefs. In fact, I would suggest that there are more similarities between Arminians and Calvin than there were differences. And again, I would argue also that the difference boils down to a philosophical argument. So what caused the general Baptist to go very liberal and deny the deity of Christ, and what caused some particular Baptists to become hyper-Calvinist and deny the free will of man is not really the biblical idea. Basically, the Arminians and Calvinists would believe what the Bible says. The difference was philosophical. So in our earlier lecture, I talked about rationalism. While you're reading in Macbeth tells you that the general Baptists were somewhat following liberalism or extreme liberalism. A particular Baptist would be extreme conservatism. As I suggested in the earlier lecture, I don't know if whether it's a case that they are following liberalism versus conservatism. That may be us masking on some political ideology today. Back then, as much as what led the general Baptist to deny the deity of Christ and what led particular Baptists to deny the free will of man was an overemphasis on philosophy and rationalism. So just for a few moments, let's talk about some of the basic agreements between general Baptists and particular Baptists. General Baptists and particular Baptists who base their doctrine on the Bible are people who have a basic agreement in several areas. General Baptists and particular Baptists would both believe the Bible is foundational source of authority. Both of them that stayed the New Connection and the revival of Fullerism, both general and particular, the people who follow the Bible would hold to biblical authority. Number two, general Baptists and particular Baptists, Arminians and Calvinists, both hold God as sovereign. Now, the general Baptists who became Unitarian and Socinian rejected the sovereignty of God and the authority of the Bible, but the general Baptists who did believe in the authority of the Bible did not reject God's sovereignty. Further, biblical Arminians believe in the sovereignty of God. Arminians who became Unitarian and Socinian rejected the sovereignty of God. There were those Arminians who did reject God's sovereignty, but a biblical Arminian or a biblical general Baptist did not. I'll quote Arminius himself. Arminius said, in this state, man's fallen condition, the free will of man toward the true God is not only wounded, maimed, infirm, bent, and weakened, but it is also imprisoned, destroyed, and lost. Now, did you hear what he said? Man's free will is imprisoned, destroyed, and lost in the fall. Now, listen to this. And its powers are not only debilitated and useless unless they are assisted what? By grace. but it has no powers whatsoever except such as are excited by divine grace. So, if I didn't tell you that was Jacob Arminius, you'd say that's Calvin. Because what he's saying is man's free will is lost and destroyed in the fall, and the only way that can wake them up is God's divine grace intervening. It's the sovereignty of God. Now, on the other hand, just as general Baptists believe the sovereignty of God, biblical Calvinists believe man has a free will. There are some of my Calvinist friends out there, and your Calvinist friends, who try to deny the free will, but there are people who are depending too much on philosophy and on the Bible. But Calvinists, biblical Calvinists throughout history, and particular Baptists throughout history, who have been devoted to the Bible, believe in the free will of man. It is true that particular Baptists who became hyper-Calvinists did deny the free will of humans, but Calvinism didn't. Now let me show you that. Biblical Calvinists believe on the free will of man. Just like an Arminian, they believe in the free will of man. I'm going to quote the Westminster Confession. This is the best Calvinistic confession of faith I can find. Westminster Confession, the Calvinist Confession of Faith, says this: God, from all eternity, did, by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass. So there's the sovereignty of God. God ordains everything that comes to pass. Yet so, that's a contrasting conjunction. Yet so, as thereby neither is God the author of sin. So first of all, God has ordained everything. But man sins free will. God didn't ordain it. God did not. Man's sinning on his own free will. Nor is the violence offered to the will of the creatures, nor is the liberty or contingency of second causes taken away, but rather it's established. Now that's powerful. This statement of faith by Calvinists is basically saying God's sovereignty, God's predetermining power didn't take away your free will, it established it. Particular and general Baptists who rejected the sovereignty of God and free will of humans were both philosophical fatalists. In other words, particular Baptists and general Baptists who rejected God's sovereignty are both philosophers, and they both come down in philosophical fatalism. More about that a little later. Some more similarities or agreements. Biblical Arminians and Calvinists believe all believers are saved and will spend eternity in heaven. In other words, a biblical Arminian and a biblical Calvinist believe that people who believe are saved and will spend eternity in heaven. Biblical Arminians and Calvinists believe all unbelievers are lost and will spend eternity in hell if they do not repent and believe in the gospel. Again, biblical Arminians and Calvinists both believe that people are lost if they don't believe, and they will spend eternity in hell. Biblical Arminians and Calvinists believe universalism, the doctrine that all people are going to heaven, is not biblical. Therefore, there are some who will go to heaven and some will go to hell. Now, let's understand this very carefully. Biblical Arminians and biblical Calvinists both believe universalism is not biblical. Universalism being the doctrine that teaches that all people are going to heaven. The Bible does not teach that in the end everybody gets in heaven. And neither do biblical Arminians nor biblical Calvinists believe that. So now with that said, both believe there are going to be some people in heaven and some people in hell. While some Arminians and Calvinists continually and vainly jangle, Paul in 1 Timothy, over the extent of the atonement, the real issue is the source of our power to believe. Since biblical Arminians and biblical Calvinists are not universalists, then clearly they both believe that there are going to be people in heaven and people in hell. So much heat comes over the argument of the extent of the atonement, and that's not really the issue. It's not really, does the atonement have power to save everybody? Of course it does. And I think that, in other words, it's efficient for everybody. The question is if everybody's not going to heaven, then why? Then how does that work in God's sovereignty? Now let me explain. Arminians and Calvinists both believe that everybody's not going to heaven. So if everybody's not going to heaven, then why are some people in heaven and some people in hell? Now here's where the philosophical problem comes. And this is what needs to calm down most of the anger over this issue. Both Arminians and Calvinists limit the people in hell one way or another. And both limitations have philosophical problems. Now let me say that again. Both Arminians and Calvinists limit the people in heaven and hell. The people in heaven are believers and the people in hell are non-believers. They both limit that. Now the philosophical problem is, why is someone in heaven and why is somebody in hell? And the answer to that Arminians and Calvinists both give, creates a philosophical problem. Now here we go, let me explain that. If the people in heaven believe in their own power without any intervention of God. Now remember, I showed you a quote by Arminius a while ago that said that's not true anyway. But now, if you do believe, and you're an Arminian and you believe that everybody's in hell and it's based on their belief, and it is, and both Calvinists and Arminians do believe that, then you have to ask the question, where did I get the power to believe? If that power didn't come from God, as some would suggest, then it has to come from me. Since I don't have a sovereign will, in other words, I don't have enough will. I didn't have enough will to be born. I didn't will myself to be born, and I can't will myself to stay alive. So if I didn't will myself to be born, then where did the power to will come from? Now, if it didn't come from God, it had to come from the cosmos. In other words, if I didn't will myself to be born, then where did my will to be born come from? What's the source of the free will? What's the source of my will? And if God's not the source of free will, the cosmos has to be. If the cosmos is the source of free will, then that's deterministic. And I was saved on the basis of the power of the cosmos. So therefore, the people in heaven are limited only to the people who had the strength to believe. And the people in hell apparently were too weak to believe. Now again, that's where you would have to go if you're an Arminian. Now, I'm not saying that you need to be either's position. I'm just saying that there's a philosophical problem there. That's quite cruel. Now, on the other hand, the Calvinists would say that power of belief comes from God. That I was born again, and I was born, and God has birthed even faith in me. Which brings up a philosophical problem. If God birthed my faith in me, then how does my free will fit in to the sovereignty of God? What I want you to understand is Arminians and Calvinists both have a philosophical problem at this point. And sadly, we tend to use the atonement almost as a straw man. The issue is really not unlimited or limited atonement. The issue is, where's our power to believe? Now, the quote I gave you previously between Arminian and Calvinists, the Calvinist quote and the Arminian Calvinists in the earlier frame there, shows that they actually both believe that divine grace is the only thing that can wake it up, and we're lost without, and our free will is lost without the power of God moving. I think what we've got to realize is there is a philosophical difference there, a philosophical problem that nobody's going to reconcile. But we need to stop creating so much heat and trust in a God who gave us the will, and a God who gave us the faith, and a God who gave us the freedom. I can't explain that philosophically, but what happened in the New Connection in the particular Baptist in the 16th century, and what happened in the revival among the particular Baptist, is Fuller and these men in the particular Baptist and Carey and these men in the General Baptist both believed and understood that the Bible teaches both things, and we need to quit fighting over those things. The previous quotes demonstrate that Calvin and Arminius both believe the power to believe ultimately came from God. This is a mystery among thousands of other mysteries humans cannot solve. For instance, there's no physicist, scientist, or philosopher in the world who can explain where the light goes when we turn the light out in our bedroom each night. We don't sit in the dark all the time because we can't turn it out. Nor do we argue all the time. We just study. The atonement is not an issue which causes so much heat and hatred. The issue is a philosophical argument over free will and determinism. The philosophical argument is framed around two opposing viewpoints. So, for a few minutes, let's just talk about what the philosophical argument basically is. It's between incompatibilism and compatibilism. Philosophically, incompatibilism teaches that free will and determinism are incompatible with each other. If free will and determinism are incompatible, then free will is an illusion and does not exist. So if you hold that position, eventually free will doesn't exist. Now follow me. If determinism does not exist, then what's the purpose of free will? In other words, free will only means something if I have the ability to cause or determine. If I don't have the ability to cause or determine things, then free will doesn't make any sense. If I do have the ability to cause things, then the question resides, what's the ultimate causer? Which brings us back to either God or the cosmos. And number two, if free will and determinism are not compatible, then all acts of the will are random. If free will and determinism are incompatible, and I can't explain actions through determinism, then anything I cause, if I throw a ball in the air, I didn't cause it. It had to be random. If all acts are random, then actions which cause things are not possible. In this view, order is not caused. It is an illusion because order does not exist. This is why pagans and Wiccans believe the world evolved from chaos, nothingness, and randomness. In other words, pagans and Wiccans and rationalists, they look at this world of order and they reduce it down to nothingness through their philosophy, and they say everything came from randomness or a big bang or chaos. Well, if we all came from chaos and randomness, then the order here is an illusion. The question is not determinism versus free will, but rather what determined. Those who seek free will in randomness are in essence denying free will. The other approach to the philosophical issue of compatibilism and incompatibilism in reference to free will and determinism is called compatibilism. When a person says they have free will, they're saying, I am free to determine things, which we are. I'm free to have a Big Mac today if I want it. To be honest with you, I do want it. But I'm also free to not eat it, and I need to not eat it because it's not good for my health, but I really want it, but I'm free to say yes or no. But see, that's presupposing determinism. If free will and determinism are incompatible, then you can't describe a free will in the context of determinism. The question becomes, what is the ultimate determiner? Clearly, no human can individually will himself to live eternally and never die. If no individual can will himself to live eternally, then what is the source of human free will? If God did not determine the free will, then the only choice we have is our will came from the random chaos and nothingness. So here's really the choice we have. It's not an issue between determinism and free will. They're not. You can't say they're incompatible. If you do, then you're going to come back to determinism and randomness. The question is what determined. If God didn't determine, then random had determined. If we came from chaos and randomness, then the order of my determinism is really an illusion, and there's no real free will. So what I would like to suggest is there is a sovereign God who determined everything and gave me a real free will. How I reconcile that, I don't know, but any other answer to that has the same philosophical problems. We need to recognize the philosophical problems and not get into such a dust-up over the issue of atonement and really confuse a lot of people. The issue is not determinism versus free will. The issue is what determined. If God determined, then we are in his image and have a will like he has. If random chaos and nothing is determined, then our free will is meaningless and random. Let's close this session with a quote from A.W. Tozer that I think really is very good concerning this issue. A.W. Tozer had some wise words concerning the issue of free will and determinism. Here's what Tozer said. Another real problem created by the doctrine of divine sovereignty has to do with the will of man. If God rules his universe by his sovereign decrees, how is it possible for man to exercise free choice? And if he cannot exercise freedom of choice, how can he be held responsible for his conduct? If he is not a mere puppet whose actions are determined by a behind-the-scenes God who pulls the strings as it pleases him. So see the dilemma? Tozer sees it. The attempt to answer these questions has divided the Christian church neatly in two camps, which have borne the names of two distinguished theologians, Jacob Arminius and John Calvin. Notice A.W. Tozer says that both of these men are distinguished theologians, and I agree, they are. And as I told you earlier on, the quotes between these two men and the Westminster Confession bear that out. Most Christians, Tozer goes on, are content to get into one camp or other and deny either sovereignty of God or free will to man. It appears possible, however, to reconcile these two positions without doing violence to either one, although the effort that follows may prove deficient to partisans of one camp or another. Now, that's an understatement. You're never going to satisfy the people who are fighting over this. But we really don't need to be fighting over this. Tozer goes on. Here's my view, Tozer says. God sovereignly decreed that man should be free to exercise moral choice. And man, from the beginning, has fulfilled that decree by making his choice between good and evil. When he chooses to do evil, he does not thereby countervail the sovereign will. In other words, when we choose to do evil, and we do not go against God's determining sovereign will. We actually fulfill God's sovereign will. Now, did you hear that? Let's say it again. When man chooses to do evil, he does not thereby countervail the sovereign will of God, but fulfills it. Inasmuch as the eternal decree decided not which choice the man should make, but that he should be free to make it. If in his absolute freedom God has willed to give man limited freedom, who is to stay his hand, or say, what doest thou? Man's will is free because God is sovereign. A God less than sovereign could not bestow moral freedom upon his creatures. He'd be afraid to do so. I love that last sentence. So, again, I hope that this little discussion will help us understand that there's a lot of heat over this issue that's completely unnecessary. And that anybody who believes the Bible believes that God is solely sovereign and man has a free will. And that faith comes from God, yet we do have a free will. That's an issue that creates a philosophical problem. I don't mind discussing the philosophy with you. Lots of ink has been wasted over that, or used over that. I don't say wasted. But we don't need to let this issue create such heat over the atonement that we create such misunderstanding. We're saved by grace through faith. It's the power of God, not the power of man. And we need to preach that.